Please be advised that the following subject matter may not be appropriate for all viewers. Hi, I'm Debra and I want to welcome all of you to our show and ask that you stay with me as we discuss something you may not want to believe is happening right here in South Florida. South Florida has one of the highest rates of sex trafficking in the country, and in this program you will hear from a local survivor, learn about an organization that is helping young girls who have been rescued, and find out what our local government is doing about this modern-day slavery. My first guest is State Attorney Dave Arenberg. State Attorney Arenberg, thank you so much for being here. This is a very important topic. Sex trafficking has been an issue in South Florida, all over the world, but people don't realize that it's actually here in our own backyards, and it's very prevalent. You said, and I quote, "Sex trafficking is a clear and present danger in our community right now, and that it's a priority for your office." So tell us, what is going on in South Florida, and why is it so prevalent?
Yeah. Well, here in South Florida, we're surrounded by water on three sides. It makes it an easy destination for immigrants, people though who have nefarious intentions, people who want to make money off of immigration. Illegal immigration by smuggling people in with the promise of riches, but in reality it's nothing more than modern-day slavery. We also have the reality that a lot of the victims of sex trafficking are homegrown. They're people who are runaways here. They're children who have been addicted to drugs at an early age and who are on the streets, and they're lured into this underworld, and it's something that we're trying to make as a top priority in our office. The problem, though, is that unlike other crimes, this is a crime where victims don't generally like to come forward. They are fearful of the police. They're fearful that they're committing their own crimes of prostitution and drug use. And they're fearful, a lot of times, of the people who are holding them captive, that if they reported the crimes to police, that they would be beaten, they'll sent back to another country if they're from another country, and otherwise harmed.
Right. It's a whole circle here of problems, and it's very difficult to really figure out how do you address that problem. This is really more of an organized crime, so this is what's making it such an underground society, so to speak.
Right. It's a tricky problem because you have law enforcement working to identify the victims, but yet the victims don't want to come forward in many cases. And then when we see these victims, oftentimes we see them after they've been arrested for prostitution or drugs or other crimes. And the victim, which is now the defendant, is represented by a lawyer. And the lawyer doesn't want his or her client to speak to us, the prosecutors, or law enforcement. So it's tough to identify those victims. And that's why, even though we know this is a prevalent problem, a clear and present danger here in Florida, there are very few cases that are being prosecuted in this area.
So how bad is it really?
It's hard to get a grip on how many cases there are. I know that there are very few prosecutions, and we believe that it is one of the most underreported crimes out there. It's where domestic violence was 20 years ago. Domestic violence was in the shadows. Silence was prevalent. Now you're seeing, because of an educational campaign, the fact that prosecutors will go ahead and prosecute cases even without a victim, if there's other evidence, that domestic violence is no longer in the shadows. Victims come forward now. But human trafficking is where domestic violence was 20 years ago. The victims don't come forward. It's hard to prosecute these cases. So what we should do to help fix the problem is to do what we did with domestic violence. We're going to publicize that silence is the enemy, that it's okay to speak up. And by implementing new laws, and Florida is actually pretty progressive on these new laws, to help deal with the problem of victims who are also defendants. Under the new law, for example, if you are a victim of human trafficking, you can get your crimes expunged from the record, depending on the crimes, of course, but if it's prostitution and drug crimes, you can get a new start in life if you come forward. And that, to me, will make a big difference.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's educate our audience a little bit. According to the Florida National Association for Women, it's estimated that 600,000 to 800,000 people are trafficked internationally, mostly women and children. And between 17,500 and 20,000 are trafficked in the United States, Florida receiving the highest percentage of those victims, and South Florida the highest in Florida. It says that 1 out of 3 children who run away are trafficked within 48 hours, and that this is a big business. We're talking about $30 billion across the world. I mean, that is really incredible to me. What does that woman or girl look like? What does that victim look like?
Well, the victim could be any woman, any young woman in general, from the United States, from elsewhere. But in general, what we see is the victims are runaways if they're from this country. They're people with unstable parental relationships. They get involved with drugs at an early age. They are, at some point, they become dependent on the streets, and this is who they meet on the streets. They meet someone who will take them out of homelessness and supply them with shelter and food and drugs, and then a relationship that they have been longing for, a relationship of friendship and love, becomes a lot more vicious. And then you have this cycle, and we see this. You know, it's something, though, that by communicating, by having programs like this, it gets the word out, and it really will make a difference. And I really believe that when we look back 10, 20 years from now, we'll see this as the same way we've seen domestic violence, where the number of victims who come forward will be dramatically increased, and the number of prosecutions will be increased, and we will get a handle on this problem, and will no longer be a number one problem in Florida. Unfortunately, we'll have, I'm sure, some other public safety matter. But right now, this is a clear and present danger because we know what's going on, we know the numbers are increasing, and we know that it's so hard to prosecute these cases at present. And that's why we need new laws, which we now have, but now we need communication.
Absolutely. So tell us, how much is the internet a part of sex trafficking?
Yeah, well, the internet fuels sex trafficking because it gets the word out to like-minded individuals in a very low-cost manner, whereas before it was much harder to get the message out. Now you can do it with a few clicks of the mouse. But one thing on the flip side is that we use the internet too. We go to those sites too, and it makes it easier for us to identify sex traffickers. And what's amazing is that they somehow think that they're just talking to each other in a little tunnel. But no, the internet is wide open, and we see the same sites, and we have been able to make arrests based on the internet. Obviously, when people think no one's watching, not necessarily.
I knew I had to do something about it when I read a story about a man who was advertising on the internet a 13-year-old girl for sex. And he, not that that's not horrific enough, he tattooed his name on her eyelids. And, you know, I couldn't sleep that night when I read that. I was just, you know, I was horrified about that. And I thought to myself, how do you even punish a person who does something like this?
Yeah, I mean, remember, this is not like NSA spying. We're talking about where people post some horrific things on the internet, searching for a 13-year-old girl or offering someone's baby for sexual favors. And we see that too. And when we see that, we're going to go after it.
Is there anything else we can be doing right now? Anything that you're frustrated about that you wish you could change?
We now have laws in the books that are giving us the tools we need to have proper investigations and successful arrests and successful prosecutions. We need the word to get out that silence is the enemy here. And the fact that we have a program like this will help make a difference.
Thank you so much again for addressing a problem that is real and here in South Florida, one that many people did not want to go on camera and talk to me about. So I really do thank you for taking your time and for making this a priority in your office.
Thanks for having me, Deborah.
Thank you. We are here at a safe house, a residence for girls who have been rescued from horrific abuse and sexual violence. It is a program that is run by the Children's Home Society, a place of refuge for young girls. My guest is Neffy McGriff, director of the Nils Smith Residence for Girls. Thank you so much for being here with us today. So many organizations can't talk to us on camera about sexual abuse and sex trafficking because the girls that are with them in residence are in protective custody. Right. So I thank you so much for being with us today, and also for what you're doing for these girls in our community.
Thank you, Deborah.
And how many girls do you have here, and how do they get to you?
Okay.
Where do they come from? Before they're here, where are they?
Okay. Currently I have 12, and that is my max. I wish there were room for more, but, you know. The girls usually come here because they have been a victim of some sort of physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, abandonment. They've been through some very horrible things in their lives, and we normally get their their information from one of our funders, and we look it over and see that if we're a good fit to meet their needs.
Okay, so because the girls have been exploited in the past, whether it was emotionally or physically abused, they really are at risk for predators. And so when they leave here, even when they go to school and when they go out into the world, how do you advise them and train them to be, wary of people who may see them as vulnerable people?
Well, that's very interesting, and how we manage that is we always give them affirmation. You have to help them love themselves, because most of the time an easier target would be someone with low self-esteem. Mm-hmm. So the very basic foundation is to affirm them. You are beautiful, you are smart, you are worth it. So they won't go looking for that affection from somewhere else.
Because these children never really were in touch with their inner child. I mean, they have absolutely no clue of just playing and being a normal child. So when someone comes to them and offers them something that is of comfort or, even fun and exciting or new, they may be really eager to take that bait. So I'm glad to hear that you're really working with them. And do you help them with housing and jobs and that transition? Because being an adult today is so different than when you or I were growing up. I'm older than you. But, at 18 years ago, you were an adult. Mm-hmm. At 18 today, you're still such a child. Mm-hmm. So they don't have those skills. Right. They don't know how to go and apply for a loan or be able to get housing that fits their budget. Mm-hmm. Get jobs, do resumes. How that's so much for you to have to handle. How do you do that?
Well, we have a job coach who sets up job skill sessions for them to attend, mm-hmm. working on your resume, what to wear to an interview, how to impress someone at an interview. We also have different people from the community actually come in and do what they call teach a teen sessions. And these are people who have their own businesses, and they tell the kids what they look for in people who they would hire. Mm-hmm. But fortunately, since the law has changed, we don't have to let them go at 18. They can opt to stay in extended foster care.
And they can stay until?
Typically, they can stay until they finish high school, mm-hmm. or they can stay until they're 21.
Right. Now, can you imagine letting a child out of your care in high school?
No.
I mean, what is going to happen to that child? They're just absolutely, a victim, mm-hmm. just as soon as they leave this door, right. Because they're 18 years old. Where are they going to go? How do they get to school? Mm-hmm. They probably drop out, and it's just a cycle of, continuous abuse to themselves. Correct. I think is what happens.
Correct.
So do you make them stay? Is there a way to make them stay here so that they can, mature?
I have encouraged it. Mm-hmm. I have, and I have very candid conversations with my girls. I let them know I'm not trying to scare you, but I do not want to sugarcoat it, because out there is real. Within these walls, it's safe to make mistakes, it's safe to learn, but out there is real.
They come in here brokenhearted with nothing. What do they leave here with?
Oh my God, they leave with a new sense of self-worth, first and foremost. They probably come in with one bag or maybe none, mm-hmm. and they leave with boxes and boxes of, memories, pictures, clothing. Wow. And they leave with knowing that if they ever needed to come back, that this is home for them.
This is home for them.
Yes.
So that's beautiful. So thank you, because that is what they needed all along.
Yes.
It is a home. So thank you for your time and for being with us today. And how can people help? Is there any way that they can help you, get the things that you need on a day-to-day basis? What can they do?
Yes, they can go on our website, www.chsfl.org.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for the work you're doing for these young girls.
Thank
One
you.
Life you change the world. So
yes,
thank
ma'am.
you.
Thank you.
And now I'm here with Katarina Rosenblatt, a local survivor of sex trafficking. She's here today to talk to us about this underground world of modern-day slavery happening right here in South Florida. Katarina, thank you for being here with us today. I really do want to hear your story because I feel that it is so important. As a young girl in South Florida, in Miami, you were a victim of sex trafficking. Tell us your story.
Thank you for the opportunity. When I was 13 years old, I had been recruited the first time at a hotel in Miami Beach. I came from an abusive home where my father was physically and verbally violent towards my mother and the rest of us. And it set up a stage of vulnerability in my life. I was always looking for that father figure, so I had a daddy hole. The first recruiting experience that I had was from a 19-year-old. She came across as an older sister, and she gained my trust and the trust of my mom, and she told me we were going to play a game, and she wanted me to dress up as a bride. And I went back to my hotel room and put a little white dress on and my mom's makeup and went to meet her in the stairwell. And when I went to meet this recruiter, she told me how beautiful I looked and introduced me to the 65-year-old man who wanted to purchase me for sex. Locking the hotel room, she had me inside. Her prey was trapped and they were ready to engage in their transaction. But how were they going to get me to stay? Well, drugs is the gateway to trafficking. And so she prepared some marijuana on a plate and she asked the purchaser, how much will you pay for your girl? She's ready for you. Keep in mind, I didn't even know I was for sale. So she asked him how much he would pay for me for my virginity, and they agreed on a price of $550. But see, I didn't take the pot, and so he got frustrated and kicked us out, and I was safe for the night. But then Mary, the recruiter, she got another girl in their ring to lure me away the next day. They kidnapped me and drugged me and left me for dead on the side of the road because the transaction didn't go through. But I was safe, I wasn't violated. My mom found me and I was able to be rescued and get to safety. Unfortunately, back then if you went missing, you got your face on a milk carton. And so the police didn't know what trafficking was, and the doctor said whatever drug they gave me would have killed me. So we had to stay up walking the whole night, and my mom tried to convince me that this girl wanted to hurt me. But I couldn't believe it. I thought she was my friend. And it wasn't until I snuck out of the hotel room a few days later and saw her recruiting a little boy on the sidewalk that I realized that she wasn't my friend. She looked at me as if she saw a ghost. And so I ran back and I knew that my mom was right. But see, when you're a child, your frontal lobe is not fully developed until you're 24, so you can't really understand everything that's happening. Mm-hmm. And they plan on that so that you don't ask too many questions. I got away from the first trafficking ring, only to be recruited again 6 months later in my middle school in Miami. This time, I had been bullied at one school and relocated to John F. Kennedy. And there at that school, my classmate had been part of, I guess, a pedophile trafficking ring, not even realizing that her father was a big part of it. And so she would recruit other girls out of our class and took us to her house, and we would have sleepovers. Mm-hmm. But these sleepovers were not pancakes and pool parties. They were cocaine and alcohol. And before long, her father found the opportunity to invite his friends who were also pedophiles like him and introduce them to us. They took us down to the car and blindfolded us and kidnapped us essentially and took us to a brothel in Broward County. Brothels are in every neighborhood in America. They're apartments, they're houses. Men are going in and out of those residential locations looking for sex with minors and willing to pay for it. At that time, with this second trafficking ring, $40 was all they were willing to pay. That's what I was worth to them. Mm-hmm. And through that experience, I wound up being violated and addicted to cocaine. I found an opportunity to run away when the guy wasn't guarding the door. And so I ran, and I searched for somebody to help me, anybody to take me back to my mom, but nobody came. Instead, people looked at me like I was just a juvenile delinquent. And so they came. They found me in the back of this apartment building, and they brought me back, and they sat me down and intimidated me. 3 grown men to a 14-year-old. It doesn't take a lot to intimidate a 14-year-old. No. And they told me that they knew who I was and everything about my life. And so if I ever told on them, what bad things would happen. I agreed. I would never tell anyone. It was enough to shut my mouth for 20 years. I was that scared. But they allowed me to make a monitored phone call to my mom because I gave them a hard time. See, I didn't want to be in the life of prostitution. I didn't want to be addicted to drugs. I was ashamed. My mom had taught me values and morals. And a lot of times people miss that in the lives of these children. They have dreams and aspirations and goals. But that was falling by the wayside as I returned back to school, and this trafficking ring planted drugs in my purse and got me suspended to send the message that if I don't want to be with them, this is what's going to happen. I wound up dropping out of school and got more involved in cocaine, heavily involved. And in my apartment building, I would be recruited again. This time I had abuse in my background. I had experienced several molestations. I had economic disadvantage. So I had all these vulnerabilities. Not to mention I still had the daddy hole because my dad was still abusive. And my family never knew what I experienced.
And how long did this go on for?
From 13 to 17, I experienced trafficking 4 times. Each time was different. You know, I kept trying to fight for my dignity, trying to get back home. But each time they broke it down, they broke me down a little more until I no longer knew who I was or what I was.
How did you regain your dignity and your self-worth?
I remember being 15 years old and being at a drug dealer's house in Brickell Avenue in Miami. And after dropping out of school, living the life on a boat in a high rise and feeling like this was the life, I gave in to every lie that they told me. And I found myself being in this drug dealer's home when a client came and he wanted to spend time with me. And I said no, because he had scars on his face. And I remember that they turned on me and they said, go upstairs, get the F upstairs, because that's what you're here for. And that's when I realized what they really had set up. It wasn't, you know, this fantasy life. They had a price. They had a purpose. And it was a business.
They owned you.
Yes.
That's what clicked in your head. They owned you. And how did that make you feel when you realized that moment that this was not the life you wanted, but that you were actually owned?
I felt like a commodity. I felt like I was a coke whore, which is what they told me the other girls were.
Mm-hmm. And your friend was arrested. Didn't that scare you? Isn't that what
Yes.
really scared you?
Yes. And I wound up in that one experience with that man, and he was in the process of raping me, very violent. I remember just praying for someone to help me. And the man got sick, and I would find out later he had AIDS. And I had been spared. I never got that sexually transmitted disease. I knew for me that was a wake-up call. Mm-hmm. Immediately after my friend got arrested, another wake-up call. All of these things took place in my life to understand that this was not the right way to live, that this was dangerous. These people really didn't love me. They didn't care about me. They were willing to sell me to someone with a sexually transmitted disease that could have killed me. Mm-hmm. When I realized that, I walked away and I told my mom, if they ever come looking for me, I need you to fight for me. And my single mom from an abusive marriage fought, and she wouldn't let them have me. They came knocking on the door. They saw me on the street. They tried to take me. They tried to get me back, anything they could. And my mom got them kicked out.
And now you're fighting for the young girls. You're out there and you've changed your life, and you're taking the strength that your mother had that day and using it to change the lives of other girls. Tell us about your work and your nonprofit.
Thank you. Yes. I wish I could say that that was the end of my long journey. But I would have to overcome so many other things. I was a pregnant teen. I fell for another modeling scam. But each of those would prove to be a stepping stone into the life of another child, because I've been able to use every experience, everything, to help somebody else. And that gives me such great purpose and joy.
And no child deserves to be robbed of their childhood or abused in a way that degrades them through their whole life, something that they never, ever get over. What is the hardest thing about being a survivor of sex trafficking?
You never fully heal. The hope, though, is that pain can be used to help somebody else. And when I talk to kids and see them come out of it, every bit of that helps the healing process in my own life. And that's why I started this, to give the girls an opportunity to help others. And in that process, they're healing themselves.
So you remember your pain to help the others with theirs. Well, thank you so much again for being with us today and sharing your story of hope and really making a difference in the lives of these young people who may not have a voice right now because they're too afraid to speak. So thank you so much.
Thank you.